So thank you, Alex. Just a couple of months ago, I agreed to be one of the speakers today without even knowing what exactly the theme is. So it turned out to be a bit shocking when I first saw it on the screen. Before and after my PhD journey. So obviously I'm not a PhD, not even doing a PhD. So how am I going to talk about my PhD journey? I feel like I'm violating the trade description ordinance right now. But fortunately, when I scrolled down the screen, I saw, oh, thanks God, the symposium is free. So at least no one's going to ask for a refund. But just after a while, I realized it's fine. The theme is fine, because I can still talk about before my PhD journey, assuming I'll do one in the future, which means I can talk about anything, right? And the first thing that came up in my mind is this. I know it may sound a trivial question, but I'm afraid it's not, because what lies at the heart of this question is something we all have to face at some point in life. That is procrastination. So essentially, this question and also my sharing today is all about how to avoid procrastination on the research journey. So speaking of procrastination, I just so happen to be a terrible procrastinator. Nobody knows procrastination better than me. By the way, this slide is going to hang there for a while, so in the name of public interest, sorry. So I was a terrible procrastinator. I remember when I did my undergrad, I basically started writing every single one of my essays just the day before the deadlines. And there were still 2 times when I wrote more than 10,000 words in less than 24 hours. Just terrible experience. While somehow it works in undergrad, I'm not sure if anyone would want to do that in postgrad. Just for one thing, you can't complete the research in one night. Just impossible. And what's worse about doing research in the UK is that you have so much free time and so little pressure such that you have to be extremely self-disciplined. So these are the academic calendar of like university in the 30 places. While there are almost 16 weeks in an academic term in both Hong Kong and the States, there are just 16 weeks in the whole academic year in UK in general. So the rest is your free time at your own disposal. And meanwhile, your supervisor is likely to be quite passive as they are quite busy. I don't mean they are not helpful, but they are just busy. So chances are you're going to be the only person to discipline yourself. In this context, I've somehow dramatically transformed from the worst procrastinator in the world to a not so procrastinating person. So throughout my study at Cambridge, I managed to wake up earlier than I did, and more importantly, finished all the essays days or even weeks before the deadlines. So the question is, how? As Schopenhauer says in a favorite quote of mine, man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. So to stop procrastinating, there are 2 conditions. One is, I can if I will. And the other is, I actually will. So in what follows, I would love to share with you some practical tricks to address the former, and something more personal about the latter. So as a professional researcher, I've done quite a lot of research on procrastination, what it is and how to break it. And I've tried a bunch of methods and found a few that work quite effectively. So if you will, these tricks are going to help. So first, focus on process, not product. If you've ever noticed, every time before we start working, there's a tiny little bit of pain in our brain that would push us away to something more pleasant, like Facebook or YouTube or Instagram. That little pain is so tiny to be noticed, but too powerful to be ignored. And in most cases, this pressure, this pain, comes from the fear of failure. So, for example, when I'm thinking I have to finish the 3rd section of my development economics paper, I am thinking of a product. But there's a risk here that I may work all day and still couldn't finish it. So, in that case, you feel the fear And that fear would trigger that little pain in your brain, which we avoid by turning to entertainment. So that explains why even the most boring entertainment becomes so attractive when we are preparing for an exam or writing a paper. A nice little trick here is to focus on process instead of product. So stop thinking I have to finish the third section of the paper. Instead, think I'm going to spend 2 hours writing. Kind of dramatically, when you think this way, the pressure and the fear and the risk of failure just diminish by a lot, because after all, anyone can spend 2 hours writing if he wants to. So as compared to product, process is something we can fully control. So next time when you wake up in the morning, try to think process instead of product. So second, break your task down into pieces. As you know, the attention span of humankind is quite limited, just about 20 minutes. So that's why those 2 or even 3-hour lectures are so torturing. Just so you know, if you are falling asleep right now, it's fine, I'm sympathetic. And the point I'm trying to make for other speakers is, if I fell asleep later, bear with me. So, with a limited attention span, there's a nice little trick called Pomodoro Technique, which is quite simple. So first, set a timer of 25 minutes, and then put away everything that could potentially draw away your attention. And then start the timer, immerse yourself in work for 25 minutes. Stay completely focused as if you were taking an exam. Then when 25 minutes have passed, just relax. Do whatever you want to do. Treat yourself a candy or watch some cat videos or even take a short nap. And then repeat the whole process. So the whole idea of the Pomodoro Technique is to break your task down into pieces. Obviously, the focus is on process, not products. It's all about staying completely focused for 25 minutes. And then it's sort of like doing a workout, like intense exercise for 25 minutes and then rest. Sometimes, to rest is to walk further and to walk more efficiently. Third, make a daily to-do list. I know it sounds very basic, but apart from drinking a glass of water in the morning, that is probably the best daily routine you can ever have. Just spend 5 or 10 minutes before bed, write a to-do list for tomorrow, and write a few lines about how you've done today. This is a value for time investment, because it takes away an excuse that we usually use for procrastination. That is, I'm going to think about what I'm going to do while I'm just thinking and maybe at the same time working or doing something else. And also it frees up our limited working memory so that we can use it for some more important uses. And the end of day reflection sort of holds us accountable for how we spend the time. So like whether good or bad, efficient or not, just face it and reflect. But just 2 things about making a useful daily to-do list. First, focus on process, not product. I feel like a broken record, but if you don't write process but product, then every myriad of having a to-do list just turn into detriments. And second, be realistic. I mean, like, if you keep defeating yourself, like, of tomorrow by cramming your to-do list, then it's quite hard for you to sustain the routine. So it may be a good idea to start easy, just like put a few tasks into a list and to build a sense of achievement at the very beginning. So, finally, the one last little trick, eat the frog first in the morning. So that means just do whatever the most difficult and the most unpleasant in the morning. I know it may take some willpower to do so, but that's exactly why you should do that in the morning first, because it's a time when your willpower is freshly restored. So these are all the tricks. Focus on process, the Pomodoro Technique, make a daily to-do list, and eat the frog first. But remember, all these tricks are just tricks. They are just tools to help you stop procrastinating. But at the end of the day, what's the most important matter is whether you have the will. If you don't have the will, nothing can really help. So as Schopenhauer says, a man cannot will what he wills. So there's actually not much to talk about how we can want to stop procrastination. The sentence itself doesn't make a lot of sense. But still, I would love to share with you some of my personal experience of feeling that intrinsic motivation to stop procrastinating. And to put it in a more hackneyed way, we usually call it passion. So, I still remember so vividly that morning. It was a morning when I woke up and with a voice in my head saying, yes, time to start working. Whoa, was that really my voice? I felt so amazed by myself and how this thought came up so naturally in my mind. Just so weird, you know. But what's so special about that day? Actually, it was the day when I finally got to start working on my thesis. So, I mean, it was a great joy working on my thesis because those thoughts had been floating in my mind for years, and I finally got a chance to put everything together and consolidate them into a coherent thesis. So it was very exciting for me. And every time when I worked on my thesis, I woke up very early in the morning. I felt a sense of joy waking up, which is so weird. But I mean, those physiological responses of procrastination still came up, but I was motivated to use all those tricks I shared with you to manage myself and to prevent myself from procrastinating. So there was a lot of hard work, like to finish my thesis, like in that procrastinating as procrastinator. So a lot of hard work. And fortunately, all the hard work pays off. I'm shameless enough to put these words on the screen. I'm not going to read that out, but I truly felt very happy and couldn't be happier when I saw my thesis was earning respect and recognition for itself. I hope at this moment you start feeling curious about my thesis, because I'm going to conclude my sharing by briefly walking you through like the major motivations and some core idea of it. I hope you could feel why I'm so motivated by this matter. So let's start with a story. 170 years ago, Ireland suffered the Great Irish Famine. An eighth of the population died, and it is natural that we may assume there's a food shortage happening in Ireland. But in fact, Ireland, in the first few years of the famine, was a net exporter of food. How is that even possible? People were starving, but every year tons of food were shipped from Ireland to places like England. And what's even more striking to me is that nothing actually went wrong in this process. As exactly how a market economy works, resources just flow to places where people can afford to pay a higher price. So food is no exception. It fled to England, and the Irish people couldn't afford the food, not simply because they were poor, but because they were poor while the English were rich. It was not simply poverty, but inequality that killed 1 million Irish people. This made me feel so uncomfortable, because for years studying economics, I've been told that market is efficient, that it makes the best use of resources. But is that really the case? Let's think of democracy. In a democratic system, an equality of votes is so important because it makes sure that all the individual preferences are reviewed and treated on an equal ground. But that's not the way market works. Market just looks at the amount people pay regardless of how much they have. So from a market perspective, a starving Irish farmer would value a piece of food much less than an English nobleman. That's ridiculous to me. And unfortunately, the consequence of this ridiculous value signaling paradigm is still happening every day on this planet. While more than 800 million people are still living in hunger today, just the United States alone is wasting more than 4,000 kilocalories per person per day, while we just actually need 2,500 kilocalories per day. So that's a huge amount of waste. And in fact, we waste 1/3 of the food we produce, while 800 million people are living in hunger. So that's a very ridiculous pattern of food movement. And particularly, we feed a tremendous amount of food to livestock inefficiently. So no wonder Joseph Stiglitz once said, it appears that it is better to be a cow in Europe than to be a poor person in a developing country. And here comes the foundational proposition of my thesis. I propose to measure value, to measure how much people treasure something. We shouldn't look at the amounts people pay, we should look at the proportion of wealth they're willing to pay for it. So that's a hypothetically equal vote, 0 to 1, while the poor little farmer may be able to pay very little for what they need, but that would be all they have. While economists have spent decades to convincing us there's a trade-off between equality and efficiency, a book is even titled with it, actually we need more equality to achieve more efficiency. Inequality is not just a matter of justice or fairness, it's also a matter of how we allocate our limited resources. This is the message I want to spread around every day waking up in the morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Johnson.
Yes, hello. Thank you for your insightful talk. I'm also a big fan of productivity, and I've read quite a few of books, like the recent book called Hyperfocus. So actually, I'm a bit skeptical about the Pomodoro technique that you mentioned, because because I've actually tried the technique myself, but then I noticed that human focus itself is a resource as well, and that when we are focusing on something, actually, we want to keep focusing on it, and then we don't want to stop. So you mentioned that the Pomodoro technique that we have to stop for every 25 minutes to rest ourselves and to take a break. But then during that time, we will lose our focus, and that is very often that will take a lot of time before we can gain focus again. So do you have any tips on how to use this technique better, to not to lose our focus in the process?
That's a very good question. I mean, all those techniques are to tackle procrastination specifically. So in that case, if you can get into what people call flow, so that you can stay completely focused and immerse yourself in work without feeling tired at all, then of course you don't need the Pomodoro technique, so because you are not procrastinating at all. So in that case, I would think we apply these techniques in a case-by-case basis. So if you feel like I can't really motivate myself to start working, that would be a useful technique to break your task down into pieces, so you know you're just staying completely focused for only 25 minutes and then you can have a break. So in that case, that would be a helpful trick. But if you found that, okay, I'm actually that kind of person that can immerse myself in work completely, without feeling tired, and I'm very motivated, then probably you won't need that technique, of course. So it's more on an application on a case-by-case style. So you see what you need and then you apply.
Right, thank you.
Okay, 2 more questions.
Thank you, Johnson, for your talk. I just want to ask about the data that you gave us just now, that over 800 million people are starving at the moment globally. And I'm sure that the UN SDGs currently is quite well known. And at the moment, globally, there are a lot of many countries or charities trying to address the problem of poverty and hunger by donating bilateral aid. Do you think it is a suitable solution, or do you have other suggestions to solve the problem?
That's a very tricky question, because there are 2 sides of the debate. I assume for one side, of course, it's very important for us to eliminate poverty and hunger. So that maybe a most straightforward way is to give the food to the starving. So in that way, that would be the role that those international aid is playing. But at the same time, on the other side of the debate, of the argument, is that if you just give the food to the poor, it may actually eliminate the capacity of the developing country in producing the food, because they just rely on foreign aid. So in that case, I don't have a like very clear-cut answer. But I think what's interesting is that like to solve the problem of hunger, it may not be very essential to build the agricultural capacity of the country. Because as you see, like in Hong Kong, like what's the agricultural production level in Hong Kong? It's like almost zero. But like there's no hunger at all in Hong Kong. So it's mostly a matter of whether we can purchase the food like from the international market. And at that point, the most important issue in solving the problem of hunger is to develop the economic capacity of those countries. And in that way, even they don't produce enough food for themselves, they can purchase it like in the international market. That would be my general like direction of solving this issue.
Okay, we take the last question over there.
Can you tell us more about your undergraduate studies and how it inspired you to pursue a developmental studies?
Yes, for sure. Yes, like father from PhD. I mean, I did my undergrad in sociology. Actually, it's very interesting why I got into sociology, because I actually loved economics and I loved mathematics, but I didn't like doing economics by mathematics. And that's why I picked like sociology, stuff like also social science, also studying like institution and social issue kind of stuff. And I think what's special about sociology is that you usually see the conflicts within a society. Like in economics, the picture is quite a one of harmony, like people make like mutually beneficial trade, so everyone is better off, everyone is happy. But like in sociology, it will give you a picture of like how the interests between people are in conflict. And that sort of echo my view on economics when I did economics in high school on like all those efficiency and stuff. So my idea about the thesis was actually built sort of like floating in my mind already when I was doing my high school, and the experience of studying in sociology strengthened that will and made me like drew into it, and then finally landed on a like MPhil in development studies and working on my thesis.
Okay, cool. We thank Johnson for his wonderful presentation.